Bird migration is one of our planet's greatest spectacles, millions of birds traveling thousands of miles over continents and oceans, all while battling the changing season and the countless obstacles along the way. It's a breathtaking display of determination and survival, driven by their remarkable instinct to return to their breeding grounds every spring. During migrations, birders participate in something called a big day, where they try to record as many bird species as they can within a 24-hour window. I wanted to start this tradition at my new homestead, but the catch is I'll be restricted to the boundaries of my property while doing so. I'll begin my search at midnight to see just how many bird species I can find here over the next 24 hours. Since this is my first big day here, I didn't really know what to expect, so I set my goal for the day at 50 species. Eventually, with a bit of habitat management, my dream is to hit 100 species here, but it'll take some time and luck before I ever come close to that goal. I started the day off with some owling. I wish this was more exciting than it was, but I just drove up and down the gravel road that goes through the property. Every 100 meters I'd stop and listen for about 20 minutes before moving to the next point. I thought the ponds would be a great place to stop and listen for owls, but I did forget to take one thing into consideration. I wanted to hang out at this pond for a bit because this is where the great horned owl was seen on the trail camera, but I can't hear anything if it's calling. These spring peepers are so loud. I'll try moving a bit further down so I can hear a bit better. I continued up and down the road for a little over 3 hours until I finally heard my first owl off in the distance. Barred owl. Okay, this is maybe not the greatest observation. It wasn't even doing its full who cooks for you call, but barred owls are our most common owl here, so I was expecting to find at least one, but I was really hoping to also get either a great horned or a saw-whet owl, but so far the day was off to a very quiet start. One species. After searching for owls, a few songbirds started singing well before sunrise, so I set out on foot to slowly make my way to the busiest spot on the property before first light. Through all of the singing birds, I did pick out a new species I was hearing for the first time here. We're still about half an hour to sunrise, and I just got the first new species for the property for the day. A mourning warbler was singing in the forest. Right now we have white-throated sparrows and some ovenbirds in the back singing, but the only problem is it's still too dark and I can't get any footage of it. So right now I'm just trying to accumulate as many species as I can by song, and then hopefully I can double back later and try to get some footage of them. I also managed to pick up a solitary sandpiper hanging out at the forest pond, a brief glimpse of an American redstart, and a downy woodpecker working on a fallen log. My strategy was to stick to the road in the morning so I can move quickly and quietly. During a big day, you want to enjoy the sightings, but be mindful of the time, especially this early, because a bad morning can make or break your entire day. Of the early morning species calling, there was only two that I wouldn't see later on in the day, and that's Swainson's thrush and common raven. Here the Swainson's thrush is singing its beautiful upward spiraling song, and in the background you can hear a few other species which we'll get to later. As the first rays of sun started piercing through the trees, this is when things really started to pick up. I made my way to the back of the property and started searching this little wet area that's filled with alders. I found an eastern phoebe perched in the ditch, one of my favorite singers, the white-throated sparrow, as well as my first common yellow-throat of the year. And this is what kicked off a string of wonderful warbler sightings. Over the past few weeks, I've been spending a lot of time watching these warblers move through. They're one of my favorite groups of birds. I still remember the day I really got interested in birding. I picked up a random field guide during my first ornithology class, and when I got to the plates with all the warblers on it, I was blown away by all the impressive patterns and colors. They were so colorful that I thought I accidentally picked up a field guide on tropical birds. But when I saw that most of these warblers not only pass through my area, but breed here, I got completely captivated by birding. So I probably spent a little too long with them this morning. I'm a simple man. I see a warbler, I lose track of time and space. But I eventually regained my composure and heard a red-eyed vireo singing behind the southernbird. The males love singing high up in the canopy, so I only caught a quick glimpse of one this morning. I then had a visit from a chickadee. This is the same one from my last video, and it visits me every time I pass through this patch of woods. They do distract me sometimes by landing on the camera or the microphone when I'm trying to film, so I'll put a handful of seeds down and show them where it is, and this will usually keep them occupied for a bit while I'm filming other birds. Since I was on a time crunch, I had to do that today and continued down the trail to find brown creepers, these flycatchers, northern flickers, and our largest woodpecker, the pileated woodpecker. I then stumbled on a very exciting find. We have this stream here that flows into this ditch. So I was standing here waiting to see if anything would show up, and I kept hearing something behind me. And then look what I just found. This white-throated sparrow bringing in nesting material is the first nest I found this year. When I would do nest surveys for work, it would take what felt like forever to find the first one, but once you break the ice, it tends to get easier, so hopefully this is the first of many. I grabbed a GPS point, I laid down a few rocks in line with the nest so I can avoid walking through that area. I don't like to use something bright like flagging tape since it could draw the attention of predators, especially smart ones like crows or ravens, which we have plenty of around here. I'll be honest, I kinda got distracted watching her build the nest and completely forgot I was doing a big day for a moment, but this actually turned out to be a great place to stop. A chickadee landed a few feet away from me. I assumed it was black-cap, but when it landed in the sun, I saw the brown accents of a boreal chickadee. For the last few months I've been saying, we should have boreal chickadees, where are the boreal chickadees? Well, finally one shows up and it's on big days, so that's amazing. I then picked up a hermit thrush that I heard singing earlier in the day, and two tiny birds with big voices trying to sing over each other. The first is the ruby-crowned kinglet. Kinglets are notorious for always moving, which has made it very difficult for me to film them over the last few weeks. But that's the nice thing about migration, is birds are so occupied with feeding and singing that as long as you don't make too much noise or any quick movements, you can get some great looks at birds while they're busy. So although the one I found on Big Day was a little high up, having it sit still while it establishes its territory made filming it much easier. Just a few trees over, the second tiny bird, a winter wren, is getting all it's got to try to sing over the kinglet. For such a small, plump bird, you wouldn't expect their song to travel this loudly through the forest. Another sound I was hearing through the trees was the drumming of a yellow-bellied sapsucker. They're our most abundant woodpecker, and it's really easy to identify them from their drumming. Other woodpeckers have this steady-paced drum, while sapsuckers have an irregular drum pattern. Nearby, another species is also drumming, but this one is using its wings instead of its beak. I went off the road through the dense understory to try to get a good look at this male ruffed grouse drumming, but this is the clearest view I could get. I ended the morning with 41 species, including a handful of really common birds that I heard but just couldn't get a visual on: American robin, blue-headed vireo, golden-crowned kinglet, song sparrow, rose-breasted grosbeak, and some Canada geese flying over. And there was also a Blackpoll Warbler which was singing its high-pitched song but just never came out into the open. At this point, I realized that halfway to 100 species was too easy of a target. I hadn't even gotten to the bird feeders yet and we were already at 41, so I set a new goal, 2/3 of the way to 100 at 67 species. And with this new goal, I had to pick up the pace. I hadn't gotten any new species in over an hour, so I decided it was a good time to head to the feeders and find some new birds. This is one of the better spots on the property to take a break at while also getting new species. I get a view of the feeders, the sky, some of the nest boxes, and the pond. I was really hoping for some waterfowl to show up. A few days earlier, we had a pair of common goldeneye stop by for a bit. These were the first ducks to land at the ponds. The female was diving for invertebrates and the male was courting the female. Sadly, they didn't show up on my big day, and actually we didn't get any ducks throughout the entire day. But at least there was other species that I was sure we'd get. Tree swallows have started nesting in a box up front. Most of our property is a bit too forested for tree swallows, but we do have more open space at the front, so I set up a few boxes and thankfully they found one of them to their liking. Another swallow species I was confident I'd get was the cliff swallow. Why was I so confident? Well, a handful of them started building their nest on the eave of our roof. Traditionally, cliff swallows nest on cliff ledges, but over the years they've started using bridges, eaves, and culverts. You can see where they're building. It looks like there used to be an old wasp nest. Now, I like wasps, but if I had to choose, I'd probably prefer having cliff swallows nest up here. This is right above my office window, so I'd be more than happy to see them zipping around every day. There is one thing I have to say about this footage, and it's that it was taken 2 days after my big day. Unfortunately, this was another species that didn't show up during the 24-hour window, but is it really big day if you don't flop on a few species you thought would be gimmies? After about an hour, I had picked up 10 new species at the feeders. Including 2 species I had heard but never saw, red-winged blackbirds flying over, and red-breasted nuthatches that are nesting across the street. This brings my total to 52 species so far. Overall, I felt like the feeders were a little more quiet than they usually are, so I thought maybe watching them from inside the house might bring in some other birds that are a little more shy. American crows were the first new bird to show up. They're also nesting across the street and come to fill up on seeds and corn for their young. I then had this groundhog show up and it was living its best life. It was eating dandelions in our yard, chasing off crows, and when it would get too hot, cooling off on our porch. I honestly thought it was dead here for a second, but nope, just relaxing. I then had a brown thrasher show up under the feeder. This is the first one I've seen here. Something looked a little off, and that's when I realized its tail is growing back in and its right leg looked injured. Despite the injuries, this one looks fine. Birds are highly adaptable. I've seen some missing one of their legs entirely and still be able to nest and find food. I also know this one flies really well because it, along with all the other birds at the feeders, took off when a sharp-shinned hawk came through. I love having these skilled hunters around. From what I saw, I don't think it was actually trying to catch anything. It looked like it just landed here to get some water from the bird bath, but this red squirrel kept harassing it until it eventually took off. With a predator around and the midday sun now beating down, this is when I hit the wall. On a normal big day, you'd have many locations scouted out, and when one gets quiet or you hit all your target species, you just move on to the next one. But since I'm restricted to the property, the only thing I can do is walk, listen, and hope that something new shows up during the quietest time of the day. And that's what I did for the next 6 hours. I'd walk to the back of the property, then back to the front, check out the feeders, and do it all over again. But each time I'd walk through different parts of the forest, stopping along the way and scanning the skies for any migrating raptors. I picked up a lone turkey vulture and a fleeting glimpse of a bald eagle, but overall it was a very slow day for raptor movement. The forecast said we should get some rain in the afternoon, and despite all of these nasty clouds moving in, I somehow found the strength to continue on. After my third trip back to the feeders, I saw a Cape May Warbler, and after my fourth, I got a gray catbird. While walking, I also found a tiny American toad, an eastern garter snake, and I walked by one of the watering holes that's filled with wood frog tadpoles. The water looked very murky and I didn't remember seeing it like that when I was there in the morning, so I figured since it was quiet out, I'd check the trail camera to see if anything went inside the water. So this is me walking out of the forest a little after 5 a.m., and then at 6 a.m. the smaller moose came through. I'm sure as it gets warmer, they're going to start using this area more and more. I haven't checked this camera since the snow melted, so I quickly flipped through the other videos. There were a few of a red fox and a white-tailed deer, but I was shocked to see all of the moose activity around here. Over the past 2 weeks, there hasn't been a day when at least one wasn't seen on the camera. Now that there's actually species moving through, I'd love to spend a few days in the different hides on the property just to see what shows up at each of them. Later in the afternoon, a few clouds did start moving in. I slowly made my way to the front and stumbled on a white-crowned sparrow along the road. With only 2 hours left of light, I was sitting at the feeders. It was pretty quiet, and honestly at this point, I wasn't too confident we'd hit the 67 species mark. But after a bit of time, I suddenly started gaining momentum again. The first cedar waxwings of the year showed up, and a male ruby-throated hummingbird was visiting the feeder. This one's been here on and off the last few days, but it looks like it's establishing its territory around the apple tree. It's a lot of work to defend his little space. If any male shows up, they're quickly chased off, all to ensure less competition when trying to attract a mate. Bird number 63 on the day was this beautiful red-bellied woodpecker, an unexpected sighting for this area. They're one of the species that are expanding their range north, so they're becoming more and more common in Quebec, but this is the first one for the property. Lucky for me, its presence seemed to annoy a hairy woodpecker, which was bird number 64. They had a bit of a standoff and then both parted ways. I spent the last few minutes of light watching the hummingbirds grab some nectar, and the tree swallows head into the nest box for the night. Spring peepers are so loud. There's a woodcock calling across the street. Across the street, I can hear an American woodcock calling. My front neighbor clear-cut his lot a few years ago, which created some great habitat for many species, especially woodcock. Just like that, I was 2 species away from hitting my new target. I got in my car and started driving up and down the road again, listening for owls, nighthawks, or whippoorwills, and after a bit of patience, I didn't hear anything. Midnight rolled around and the final tally was still 65 species on the day. Although it's fun to try to reach a specific goal, it's not really about that. It's more about enjoying the time with these birds as they establish their territories or fuel up for the rest of their migration. This will be the new mark to beat for future big days here. I'm hoping to do another one during the fall migration, but for now, there's so many more things to explore and discover at my wildlife homestead.